All right. We're going to get started here. We are going live for the remote audience as well. I want to welcome everyone here to our For the Love of Insights event here at Red Door Interactive. I'm Reed Carr, CEO here, and this is one of my favorite events of the year. We'd love to see how we did, reflect on last year, and get the year off going right. With these fantastic insights. For those of you here in the room, if you need to use the restroom or anything like that through these doors around here, restrooms are over here. We will be sharing the presentation after the event for those of you who've attended, the recording, presentation, and all of that. So without further ado, I think you get the fortunate opportunity to not have to hear from me anymore, but get the opportunity to hear from Mallory Collins, who's going to share these insights and give you some fantastic takeaways for the year. So without further ado, we've got Mallory.
Reed, it's really good to be here with all of you, the few, the brave that made it in the rain today. For those online, it is raining in San Diego, which is a big event. But I'm really happy to be back here for another year of consumer insights. I really look forward to this every year. So just want to start us off talking about culture. So does anyone recognize this furry little, by the laughs, I think some people recognize this furry little monster, this Labubu. I had a Labubu encounter this weekend, actually. I was at a brewery and this woman was clutching her little pink Labubu and was like, have you seen my tween daughter? She's missing her Labubu and she's going to be really upset. So we're now in a world where there's little Labubu lost and found moments. But these little furry creatures who are often attached to designer bags, and then on the right-hand side, I have this Coldplay kiss cam moment. Anyone remember that moment? Really two people on the Jumbotron, caught in a moment, caught in an act. Chris Martin yells out, well, either they're having an affair or they're just really shy, and they were having an affair. So what do these two things have in common? I think they're really different moments, but they're moments in time that shaped culture. On the left, you have this over time building of a status symbol of luxury, which is kind of funny because it's a furry thing, but it's attached to a designer bag. It means something. If I'm carrying one of those furry monsters, it has a status symbol and a heritage from Japanese culture. On the right-hand side, you have a moment that created viral controversy, a lot of online conversation, and even in-person party conversation about, are we willing to accept public exposure, the morality of relationships, and the wrongdoing that was happening. And I think when people think about culture, they might get it wrong because they think that it's just one singular thing. But really, it's an aggregation of all of these moments in time that end up shaping the way that people think, how we go through the world, and what we believe. So why start us off with culture, and why not just jump in and tell you about what the 2026 mindsets are? If anyone recognizes this, it's a Jackson Pollock painting. I got a nod, so you recognize it. He is and has become just, such a huge inventor of modern art, of innovative art. And what he does, which I had to look this up because I thought it was really interesting, is he actually takes household paint and he lays out the canvas horizontally. And that way, each piece of paint can have a perfect laying. And he didn't try to reach everyone through his art. He actually only got one single studio owner on board who was really thrilled about his art, who then talked to curators, who then got collectors on board. And this idea of culture eats strategy for lunch makes me a little hungry, but it also means that culture is above everything. If we don't tap into culture, if we don't understand those moments like the Labubu and like the Coldplay kiss cam, and we're trying to talk to our consumers without that context, we're missing the boat. We're not reaching them, and we're not meeting them exactly where they're at. And culture, even in business, is a huge accelerator or detractor. If you look at two kind of similar businesses or similar industries, you can see Zappos. They really skyrocketed. They had a platform of inclusion and of accessibility. And then you can look at someone like American Apparel, who offered these leotards I shouldn't have been wearing in my 20s. Really unflattering when you go back and look at photos. And they also created controversy and ultimately destroyed the culture of what they stood for. So it can either be a detractor or an accelerator. So when I say our work as marketers is to change a culture, you might be wondering, why am I not saying the culture? I'm choosing the word a or this culture. And I think it's so important to remember that there's no single us. Each individual has their own worldview. That's the idea of first understanding your smallest viable audience. What is the group of people that you specifically are talking to or want to change or want to speak to? As a marketer, you have to do that hard work first and not try to reach the masses. Second, you really have to commit to that. You have to say, I'm brave enough, I'm bold enough to stand for something for that audience and to really integrate in their culture and help to shape that culture. And that takes a lot of courage and boldness, but great marketing doesn't come from being generic or just everyday or shouting to the masses. It really comes from understanding those worldviews. So then how do we change a culture? And when I say culture can be changed, I mean, it's not fixed. Those moments that happened that I shared earlier and that I opened up with were things that might have been unpredictable, things that people had influence and impact on. And in order to change the culture, we have to get into the mindset of the consumer. We show up, and I think each of you show up, I know my team members do, to create change. We don't just show up to say, let's keep things as they are, let's keep things rolling. We really want to create difference in the minds of consumers and in the businesses that we serve. And so in order to do that, you have to get deeply into the mindset of the consumer and the way that they think and believe. So now just a little preview of what we're going to cover today. I'll get off my culture soapbox for a minute. First, we're going to pause. Before we look forward, I want to look back at the predictions from last year. So last year, I predicted 4 or 5 things would happen for marketing. So want to kind of preview those and see, can you trust me of what I'm saying this year? Do I know what I'm talking about or do I not? Then we're going to pursue. So I love this part. We're going to go into what are the influences that are shaping consumers' mindsets in America. You probably are aware of them because they're top of mind for you. It's already, a month and a half into the year. And then we're going to play around. So we're going to predict some things for this coming year. We're going to have some conversation. We're going to go through practical applications. So this time last year, again, we predicted a couple of things. First, we predicted community size would shrink. This prediction came from the fact that consumers are surrounded by misinformation, a lot of information, and they're retreating to these tight-knit communities. There was a consumer mindset that was called kinship, and it really just meant gathering in smaller communities and going back to, instead of mass connection through media platforms, it was let's have small conversations. People would retreat from big cities to smaller cities for slower paces of life. People would go to just individual platforms to make decisions. And we also predicted that shopping would change and buying might even happen in groups instead of on an individual basis. So what happened here? We gave this a seedling of still coming to life. But basically we saw that 88% of Americans did engage in smaller niche communities on TikTok and YouTube. So little forums, chats that weren't to the masses, and they were interested in some of those smaller communities. But we're not giving this a full land because we did see that the mass media platform, so for example, Meta and TikTok and things like that are still widely used. So while consumers did engage in these smaller niche communities, that didn't mean that they pulled back from those larger mass communities. They still engaged in some of those bigger platforms. And then also we predicted that group buying and shopping still happened solo. So that wasn't something that came to fruition. But what we did see is that consumers wanted more meaningful connection, and that's something that's going to stay into this year. Second, we predicted that journalists would go direct to consumer. For those of you who were here last year, you might remember there was a mindset called veracity. And that was this idea of seeking truth, of wanting to know what's really real and wanting to get the right information. And here we did see that come to fruition. We saw news viewership on national stations like the CNN's dip and decline. We saw that social media overtook those stations as the number one source of news. We saw podcasters, we saw bloggers, and then we also saw an increase in verification apps like News Source, which you can check and fact check if news is actually real. So here we saw that there is that seeking for truth, and we'll continue to see that going into this next year. And then third, and I realize some of these titles were a bit ridiculous, so bear with me. Dopamine would create brand addicts. So this one wasn't, a crazy intense one, but it was this idea of if you're on social media and you're watching like a funny video or something like that, you get a quick hit of energy, you get a quick laugh, and we'd become programmed and addicted to that as a society. So therefore, the brands that were really going to stand out, that were really going to triumph, were the ones that really dipped into that and said, I'm going to create these quick little moments that create a laugh, that create humor. And we saw that somewhat come to fruition, but ultimately the brands that really stood out also had a backbone of value, of truth, and having a deeper meaning. It wasn't just about making someone laugh right away. There was something beneath that, and there was something true about that. And I looked at some of the things that took off, the brands that really meant something. I remember Erewhon, smoothies became a lifestyle for them and status symbols. Poppi and Olipop, some of those beverage brands grow really big followings because they created healthier for you products. And Liquid Death, which is a really fun one, created humor and just controversy to get a really big following. So important to create moments of joy, moments of relief, but not alone. You still have to have that value. Like a quick hit of dopamine isn't just enough. And then fourth, with another silly name, nostalgia would be a rocket launch. I was thinking about this one yesterday. We hosted a Super Bowl review with One Club and AMA, and a lot of the really profound ads that resonated with us and with others and with consumers were grounded in nostalgia. We're taking you back to these moments that created relief and reprieve from just the stressors and everything that's going on in our modern day. And 70% of consumers said that they're more likely to buy something if it feels nostalgic, if it feels connected. And what really mattered was how nostalgia showed up. It wasn't just looking at the past for past sake, to reminisce, but it was actually to create and cultivate a better future. I looked at Coca-Cola, how they revived Share a Coke with digital customization, or this makes me feel old, but on TikTok, there's hashtag 90s Christmas as nostalgic. Gen Z drove Y2K fashion and transparent tech. So nostalgia created this way and this mechanism for brands to connect with consumers and create relief and reprieve among a really stressful time. And then finally, artificial intelligence would be this silent intruder that would kind of slither into day to day, but not be welcomed with open arms. This one gets a clear yes that it did happen. In 2025, about half of US consumers said they feel more concerned than excited about AI. We're in this place where there's such a paradox of fear, but also excitement around the hope of technology. So this one, fully arrived, and we felt like AI did inundate lives and usage was really up of AI, but it's still a question mark about how people feel about it, and they don't want to lose that sense of humanity and belonging. 50% is a good batting average, and I think we hit that. So the 2026 consumer mindset. As we get into this, I want you to think about what I was noting in the beginning about culture. Those moments that really change things. How do you as a brand latch onto that and let culture really chase and take your brand in a new direction? So as I go through the consumer mindset, think of what's the culture that you as a marketer are hoping to change? Not the broad culture. What's that small subset of people that you can really serve, people you can really influence, and the change that you can make for them? So keep that in mind. So first, I need to start with what key influences shape Americans today. And again, these should feel pretty familiar, kind of like the vibe of what's happening now, because we're a month and a half, which is crazy, into this new year. So I focused on some really macro trends, and then we can dive in. I had to start with some fun cultural moments, like Kendrick Lamar starting us off with this halftime show where he uses a platform to go after his feud. Um, and then Katy Perry just started a conversation around space accessibility and celebrities' involvement in that. And then, of course, Sydney Sweeney, gene ads for American Eagle, causing controversy around body image, what's acceptable, and how much we should really show off. So a couple of fun cultural moments to highlight. And then wanting to get into next, what are the my clicker seems to not be working, Tyler. Oh, next we want to get into what are some of those macro trends. As soon as I said it, it started working. So we're in what I like to call this age of adaptive insecurity. So I grew up camping every single weekend. And I like to think of adaptive insecurity as camping in the dark. And sometimes we camped in Yosemite and there were bears. You know that there's things that are unpredictable. And so you're in a state of caution. You're in a state of preparation and you're always keeping one eye open and maybe you don't sleep the best. So you've accepted some lack of norm and you've accepted that these factors are coming up. That's adaptive insecurity. So first, what's contributing to that? Labor market pressures. So this is from an economic standpoint. We all feel this. We know this. I don't really have to tell this to you. But there's just continue to be stressors. In terms of layoffs, we saw that, last year, layoffs increased by 54% over the last year, which is really a tough stat. It's a tough thing, and it just continues to change mindsets and the way that people adapt from an economic standpoint. We saw U.S. job openings fell to a 5-year low, so lack of new jobs opening up. Contributes to the fact that instability has become accepted as the norm. A side hustle, a side job, additional revenue streams are no longer nice to have to make some extra cash. It's a way to hedge bets and eliminate risk. It's become normal. Second, politically. Political division is deepening and civic engagement is rising. Last year, we saw 7 million Americans stand up with signs and protest. We're seeing more participation. And polarization isn't just about parties, it's about identity. It's also about what's true and what's not true, which is a huge advancement that continues to happen. So people are operating in competing realities of what they believe is true and not true as a result of that. And then third, this one's really fascinating to me as a millennial. The social contract is stalled by concentrated wealth and delayed adulthood. I took a look at where wealth is distributed, and it was really interesting. Baby boomers hold 51% of wealth, and millennials hold 10% of wealth on a relatively even population size. So what that means is that wealth is being held by those older generations. Younger generations are delaying because they have to financially. Those typical markers of the American dream in adulthood, of marriage, of owning a home, of starting a family. And that creates a really interesting conversation, a really interesting approach when we think about the mindset that consumers are having of those younger generations accepting, hey, I might not make those milestones. Let me celebrate other milestones, or just know that the American dream and what it looked like might not be true for me. And then finally, technology becomes inevitable and not aspirational. This is speaking to the fact that Americans live in a state of cautious dependence on AI, on technology. We know that it's necessary to do our jobs. Many of us in the workplace also know that this is a component that we're required to focus on, but we're scared that it might take away humanity, that it might change the workforce. And so that's a really real complex, and that's something that really shapes us. In 2025, the Fed reported that more than half, so 54% of US adults use Gen AI, which is higher than I was originally thinking if we think about all of the generations spanning us. So that usage is continuing to rise. So given all of that, what will 2026 stand for or continue to stand for? We'll go back to camping for a moment. Think of, I'm going camping, but I'm prepared. I've got my pack. I've got my, bear cans. I've got my food put away. So I've managed the different factors, and I'm therefore calmer. I know that there's chaos around me, but I'm prepared for what's coming. That's the meaning of intentional resilience. It means that you don't have control. You're accepting this chaotic reality, but you're preparing the best you can, and you're finding some relief in that and joy in those moments. So now an opportunity for you to share what emotions come to mind when you saw some of those key factors when we looked at just the macro environment that consumers are experiencing. You can shout them out in the room and I can repeat them in the mic for those on the line. Anything come to mind? Anxiety? Vulnerability. That's a good one. Fear. A laugh, but maybe a nervous laugh over there. Loss of control. Yeah, they're all good ones. So we'll see some of those come through when we talk about the four consumer mindset. So I'm going to go through each of these. Whither will is the first one, and then we'll get into tempered. Then we'll talk about collective stewardship and strategic joy. I love this one. I have to open it with "Slow Down, You Crazy Child." Anyone? Elton John. That song reminds me of 13 Going on 30, for those of you who saw it, but it's when the main character, Jennifer Garner, returns to her childhood home and accepts that she's going through this breakup and she's changing a big life milestone, but she accepts herself and she's okay with it and she finds comfort in that. And whither will is this term, and it's coined by John Koenig, who actually wrote this interesting study. It's called the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. It has a lot of different terms that describe today's day and age, which, yeah, the name itself gives me a little bit of anxiety. But if you break this down, the word whither will. So whither comes from, a flower or something that shrivels, that dies out. And this is a transition into with her, which is to go to a place, and then will, which is you have a say in it, you have responsibility, you have a purpose in what actually happens. And here we're seeing this idea of the great exhaustion, which you've probably heard about, where we're just so overwhelmed by technology and consumers have so many notifications and things that they're facing that they want to come back from that. They want to move to what's called lower stakes living. So set different standards for what's acceptable, what success looks like, and just be a little less hard on themselves. That's really central to the idea of whither will. It's not escaping, it's corrective behavior to be able to cope and find meaning and purpose. And we're already seeing some signals of this. There's even there's this men's retreat, and it's called Both Sides, and it's a getaway from technology, and it's a total escape. Things like that are growing in popularity to just give people a reprieve and some freedom from responsibility. And central to this is the idea of self-acceptance. So what to watch for here as a brand and a marketer is this idea of dishabituation. So that means removing some of the habits that don't serve yourself or serve the consumer. So if you're a brand, consider that. Is what I'm doing helping? Are the messages that I'm sending out aligned with freeing responsibility, giving relief, giving reprieve or not? And then I love this idea, but going from return on investment, so ROI, to return on energy. So are the things that I'm doing not just creating money or financial means? That was kind of a past thought, a past mindset. Now is what I'm doing bringing and filling my cup? Is it bringing me joy? Is it bringing me new energy? So a couple things to watch for. These are fun. This is new for this year. So at Red Door, we have this tool and it's called Market Mirror. And it's a syndicated AI tool where we can plug in any data. So here plugged in survey data and just different research data and these different mindsets. And we can spit out and create this panel of AI personas. And so it's really great if you're thinking about, okay, I have an idea, I have a concept, I want to toss it around, I want to get feedback, but I don't have maybe time or budget to do a full research panel or focus group. So we created some panels and we said, tell us what these concepts mean, tell us how they come to life. It wasn't the full mindset of the consumer, but we asked them, put on your whitherwill cap and tell us what you would do. So I'll read these out. There was a long Slack thread spinning up about a problem that technically touched my role. I felt the pull to jump in, add context, and prove that I was useful. But instead, I closed it and I went back to my actual work. It felt uneasy at first, then oddly lighter. So in the work setting, thinking about, okay, how do I protect my own time and do the things that fill me up and not always jump on a response? And then I saw multiple urgent posts about different causes all in one evening. I felt torn, like if I didn't engage, I was failing somehow. I read, donated to one, and logged off without sharing anything. So not feeling the need to participate in things that don't fulfill, even if there's social pressure. That's Witherwell. So next we'll go on to our second one, tempered. This is the idea of optimistic skepticism. And has anyone ever told you it's better when you just don't have expectations or just set your expectations low? Don't trust those people. Or personal experience. But that's the idea of tempered. It's being realistic about what you can expect. It's hopeful engagement. Consumers haven't lost hope, but they're resetting their expectations. They don't want to be let down. And this one is an evolution. We've seen optimism evolve, be present in the consumer mindset over the past 3 years. But it started with tragic optimism in 2024, really the pandemic and coming out of that, where it was just accepting that tragedy and hardship is real. And so I can choose to be optimistic. Rational optimism then was last year more of the mindset, which argued that optimism is a practical choice in a constantly changing world. So a little less doom and gloom. Now we're in this state of tempered, where moving into a more optimistic setting of the default might be optimism, but it's definitely not without skepticism around expectations. And optimism becomes more measured. It doesn't disappear. Globally, I thought this was interesting. 40% of people say they feel optimistic about the future. But then if you contrast that to and look at some faster growing technological markets like India, that number jumps to 75%. And that's kind of the paradox of the consumer mindset, where there is fear around technology, but there's also hope in it. And according to this 2024 Eldman Trust Barometer, people trust someone like me as much as they trust scientists evaluating new technologies. I read that and thought, like, hard day to be a scientist. What influencers are more trustworthy than you, or creators? But that's the reality. So for brands, tempered means moving beyond hype and really hyping things up. That's going to raise an eyebrow. Success is going to come from helping consumers interpret complexity and offering clarity, offering balance so that they can engage more thoughtfully and not blindly. So what to watch for as a marketer? Think about that increase in trust of people like me. We'll talk about this in a prediction, but you ought to be using creators, influencers as an ingrained part of your marketing budget and your marketing program. It's not just a line item in media anymore, an extension of your team. Also, with tempered, consumers are craving that safety and confidence and clarity. So how do you create that as a marketer? And then our fun quotes. I felt cautiously hopeful about a community program offering discounted utilities for families like ours. It sounded genuinely helpful. At the same time, I learned those things can come with strings. I read everything carefully, I signed up, but I didn't cancel my existing arrangements yet. I needed to be sure it wouldn't create problems later. And then I felt this recently with a new budgeting feature my bank rolled out. It actually looked useful instead of flashy, which surprised me. I felt a small sense of relief, like maybe this could make things easier, but I didn't fully trust it yet. I looked through the categories myself, And I wanted to, before I connected all of my accounts, I told myself I'd watch how it behaves for a few weeks before relying on it. So tempered expectations, dipping of a toe, and it's really important to provide that explanation. And then the third, collective stewardship. I think of this as like the next level of next door, that vigilant community all coming together to figure out important problems and maybe some not as much important problems. This is defined by a sense of shared responsibility for protecting people, places, data, and values. And it combines two concepts. So, one being civic hope, which means there's hope in community, there's hope in us all working together, and shared vigilance, which is the idea that we're all on the hook for protecting each other and for keeping each other safe, and we live in community. And this is really the belief that active care, it's not about standing on the sidelines, but it's actively working together to preserve communal well-being, safety as a community. And the reason that this is coming to fruition is that hope has been really volatile throughout the entire 2020s. It's been on an up and down roller coaster. It's stabilized a little bit since the pandemic, but it declined with inflation, geopolitical tension, and a lot of the factors that we're seeing today. And researchers have even described this term for the economy and it's called macro angrynomics. And it means that it's so messed up or unfair that you just have this feeling that it's broken for most people, and therefore we can't rely on the systems or the government, and we have to do this ourselves and take matters into our own hands. And so in response, consumers, they're not withdrawing or pulling back, they're recalibrating. And civic hope emerges as a really cool solution to creating better outcomes. And at the same time, that shared vigilance is going to really intensify. And consumers are going to be increasingly protective of their community and their tribe. And so together, it's this shift to active care. So what to watch for as a marketer? One small example of this that's already happened is this idea of anti-tourism. I actually saw in Spain, did anyone see that? Yeah, squirt guns or water guns were being used to repel tourism, and there's tourism taxes. So while hopefully that doesn't happen everywhere, it's really interesting just to see that protection and that kinship and that community. So we'll take a look at our market mirror quotes. I stopped myself from jumping into a heated comment thread, even though I had things to say. I felt that familiar surge of irritation and then exhaustion. And I asked myself whether adding my voice would help anyone or just raise the temperature. So I closed the app instead. It felt like choosing not to make the day worse for me or for anyone else. And then my kid wanted to download this new learning app the school suggested. Everyone else already had it. But I paused because the permissions were intense, including location, microphone, just the whole thing. And I felt that familiar knot, like if I don't slow this down, something permanent happens without anyone noticing. I didn't say no to forever, but I emailed the teacher and asked what data it collected and why. My kid was annoyed, rightfully so, and I felt guilty, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that once it's done, you don't get to undo it. So you can see that active vigilance. And then we have strategic joy. I love this one. This is our last one. This one makes me think of my first concert ever, which was Avril Lavigne. Does anyone go to Avril Lavigne? Sorry, Mom. Had those jelly bracelets, those plastic ones up my arm, and I was jumping up and down to Skater Boy. And to me, that's the idea of strategic joy. And it's a concept of collective effervescence, which is putting yourself in these situations where everyone's feeling the same emotion at the same time. You're all feeling the beat of Skater Boy, you're all feeling Avril Lavigne on stage, and you're strategically putting yourself in those situations to feel connected. It's like that full return to being in person, engaging with people, and wanting more out of community. And this mindset emerges as a direct response to prolonged stress, that anxiety, loneliness, and a lack of connection that people are getting in online spaces. They're seeking play, they're seeking creativity and lightness, not just as things that make them temporarily happy, but as tools for actual discovery. And 6 in 10 consumers say that playful or humorous ads make them feel better, not just in the moment, but actually about the company itself. And in the US, workplace unhappiness costs about $1.9 trillion to businesses every year, just in lost productivity. So culturally, joy is becoming more visible and more collective. Memes and creators and all of those things are creating those moments of joy. And there's campaigns like the politics of joy, which show how plainness and cultural fluency can actually create social change. So for brands, strategic joy represents an opportunity to participate in community, to create a sense of collective effervescence for the culture that you're serving. So what to watch for? This first one is fun. It's called Kid Intelligence, or KI. And it means consumers are embracing this childlike play in order to figure things out and make advancements. And they're returning to this sense of wonder, not being afraid of like, oh, if I think like a 5-year-old, that's a bad thing. It's actually embracing looking at things with new eyes and a fresh perspective and finding joy. And then this concept of pleasure activism, which means you're actually turning inward instead of outward in order to activate a sense of well-being and to pursue that and to create ideas. And then a shift overall from what is or what has to be to what if and possibility. Then we'll look at our fun quotes. I was overstimulated and anxious, and I wanted to cancel the whole evening. But instead, I made some tea, I turned off notifications, and I sat by the window for a while. No productivity, no fixing. And my body finally settled, and that felt like enough. Or after a heavy news day, I could feel myself hardening. Instead of doom scrolling, I texted a friend and asked, do you want to grab food? We ended up laughing for 2 hours about nothing important, and I felt lighter. Not because these things are okay, but because I wasn't carrying them alone for the night. So you can see that strategic joy come into fruition with silencing of notifications, calling on friends, which has always been true, but even more true to help you get through the hardness. So those are the 4 mindsets that we're going to play around with and create some predictions around. And as we do that, just remember kind of our formula of what we've been going through. We started with culture, right? We started with these moments in time. Then we introduced mindset and behavior. So what are those big trends? What are those big political, environmental, social things that are happening that are influencing mindset? What are those actual mindsets? And then now we're going to get into, well, what does that mean in terms of purchase decisions? How do I as a marketer then show up in a way where I can really create a culture around these mindsets? So the idea that consumers are dancing now between pressure and possibility. This is really interesting, and it's a continued thing that we'll see is this pressure, social pressures, economic pressures, technological pressures, and then also this possibility too, strategic joy, right? Shared vigilance. I do have a role in this. I can change this. I can contribute. So it's really important to keep in mind that they're constantly battling those two things. And so what does that mean as a brand? What should we do? We should move from influence, from pushing out, from trying to change their behavior and what they do, to care. How do we help consumers cope? Cope with what's going on, give them relief, choose, make the decisions easier, integrate both AI and non-algorithmic pathways so that they can decide how do they want to engage with you. Protect, think about that again, return on energy, protect their energy, protect their time, don't inundate. And then participate. What are the ways in which you help participate in culture and shape that next moment? So then we'll look at how does this come to life? So these are the 2026 predictions. And again, I caveat, these are my predictions based on these mindsets. 50% is a good batting average. We'll see next year how we did. First one, energy preservation is currency. Did you know that on average, an American spends 5 days every year just deciding what to watch on Netflix? Not even watching the thing, just sitting there spinning. I mean, I can relate. I probably would definitely add up to 5 days, if not more. But that's not entertainment. That's exhaustion. That's overwhelm. That's just too many decisions, and it's hard to actually land on something even when you really desperately want to relax. So, what we'll see in 2026 is that consumers are going to actively opt out, muting notifications, unsubscribing from always on channels, creating a little bit of space and calming the noise in their minds. And I would even say proudly embracing and reclaiming boredom. It's okay to just sit there. It's okay to have a sense of calm and a sense of relief. And so, in response, what we should do as marketers is shift our approach. So, stop chasing that energy and start protecting it. You can win by doing less, so fewer messages that add more value, clearer pathways. And this one's really grounded in that first mindset of whither will. So consumers aren't going to stop buying, but they're going to stop tolerating friction, confusion, noise, and pressure. And so in 2026, the brands that earn loyalty are going to be the ones that reclaim energy and not drain it. That's prediction number one. Prediction number two, creators become product manuals. And now I had some fun with the name product manuals, but Megan on our social team might have a different term for that, but hopefully you see my point. Today, consumers are increasingly searching TikTok or YouTube before Google. They're looking to influencers and creators to actually intervene and translate what things mean. They're using social more for even product manuals of how do I use this thing that I bought, or how do I fix this thing that's not working. And so we need to be aware of that. And what that means is that creators are going to actively become your onboarding guides, comparison engines, and trust validators. And that's interface behavior. They're going to integrate across the funnel. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, instead of looking at influencers or creators as this line item in your media budget, think of them as an extension of your team and of your brand. How can you rely on them so that consumers who are actively looking for people like me and not scientists can get information and real information from them? Next, and I had to use toilet paper because when I think about unpredictability, this was my worst nightmare ever in the pandemic when there was a shortage of toilet paper. Discounts detract and predictability pays. The next prediction is about preparedness, driving and creating actual segments of the market. So, from tariffs to climate disruption, Americans are increasingly anxious about when, what, and who to buy on. It used to be kind of fringe behavior to be a prepper or getting things ready, but I think we're going to see that come more into the mainstream. On TikTok alone, the hashtag survival skills has surpassed 10.6 billion views, which shows that people are actively looking for advice. And I don't know how good this is advice is. I haven't checked it out on how to survive. And offline data also reinforces it. In the US, 11 million people were displaced by climate related disasters in the last year. So people are stocking up, they're simplifying essentials, and they're preparing for the unknown that they've accepted. So, what to do as a marketer? There's pressures that are driving that panic buying and pricing anxiety. So, consumers are looking for price certainty. Consider and think about things like discounts or promotions. Are you offering clarity and consistency and reliability? And if you're not, and if those offers and discounts are compromising that, then you ought to rethink those. Think about offering stability of consumers know where to buy, how to buy, what it costs, and when. And also think about preparedness emerging into everyday commerce infrastructure rather than promotion itself. So predictability and transparency will be really key. Fourth, AI secures the role of frenemy. This next prediction is a continuation of the AI paradox of this fear, but also this excitement and hope that comes with technology. Americans are consistently using AI assistants. I think some are even befriending them. And they don't reject AI, but they're rejecting the lack of it being a personal humanity and it transforming them beyond what they wanted it to be. And so, in response, status and values are shifting away from algorithms. As mass platforms are losing signaling power, there's increasingly anti-algorithm pathways to purchase, to explore. So for brands, this means two things at once. Use AI quietly and transparently with clear limits and also human intervention and human oversight. Invest just as heavily in what algorithms can't replicate. So continue to use AI, use it to advance your practice, but also think about the things that AI inherently can't do. And I think we'll see this continue to shift with AI as right now consumers are using it in more of a broad, everyday, let me use it for everything sort of sense. And we'll start to see them orient to using AI for things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do without AI. And then we have small joy is big business. People aren't waiting for life's big milestones anymore. That stat that I said earlier about the distribution of wealth with baby boomers and millennials is the perfect testament to this. That those realities, those milestones of the American dream just aren't necessarily coming true anymore. So how do we create that small joy and reinvent that for people who might be let down by those things? A bad day or it's a treat, there's actually a concept and it's called treatonomics, which is that, like giving yourself little treats. And 36% of consumers are actually willing to go into short-term debt to buy something that makes them happy. So think about how do you tie that joy into the way that you sell? Big dreams are postponed, but those small little victories and little joys are non-negotiable. Selling aspiration and start selling that relief, reward, and little moments of fun. So how to win in 2026? If all these predictions come true, these consumer mindsets come to fruition, what does that mean in terms of your playbook as a marketer? Number one, design for energy preservation. Remember that. It's not about ROI, it's about return on energy. How can you minimize all of the buzz and the notifications and the pushing to consumers, make it feel more natural, be useful to them, be helpful to them? Second, embed creators into your team. I do believe that influencers, creators are going to become a huge voice of your brand story. We're even seeing this as AI advances. AI search results are returning results from creators. They are speaking on behalf of your brand. So find that little culture of influencers and that little tribe that really stands authentically for your brand and use them to get your message out. Use them to teach about your product. Use them to show credibility. Replace urgency with predictability. I think we've seen many iterations of quick promotions of last 3 left, buy today, you're gonna miss out. Rethink that. Think about the stress, the weight that's on consumers today. Think about that idea that I talked about of Witherwill of wanting to be free of responsibility. Is what you're doing in the promotion and the urgency creating stress? Or is it creating energy and excitement for them? And that's a really delicate balance. And then pair AI precision with human discovery. So I talked about creating those paths where consumers can access you through AI, but pair those with anti-algorithmic or non-algorithmic paths with real humanity, with other ways to find things. And think about, for your brand, your company, what are the things that AI couldn't do or couldn't replicate, and continue to do those things. And then measure emotional lift like a KPI. Maybe I'm over accelerating this one, being a creative, but think about what does each ad, what does each promotion do to the person that you're reaching? Does it create that little moment of joy? Does it create fear or anxiety? Or does it create and build trust? You need to keep an eye on sentiment. You ought to be surveying and understanding not just the KPIs to your website, but what are the brand associations and what do people think and believe to be true about your brand? So those would be my recommendations, predictions for how to win. So as we wrap up, and I'll open it up for questions, I wanted to bring it home. And when you zoom out, 2026 isn't about predicting the next little Labubu, because I couldn't have predicted that one, or Coldplay Kiss concert moment, because also fairly unpredictable. But it's about understanding what are those moments that have shaped culture, those moments in time that unique culture, that smallest viable audience that you want to change and tap into. Understand their mindset, deploy the right approach, and let culture do the rest and bring them to you. Thanks so much for spending your time with me. I'll open it up to questions. We have about 10 minutes left. Yeah.
All right.
Tyler, do you want to share? Okay.
I got a mic over here.
Hi, thank you. Wow. Hi, my name is Emma. I work in influencer marketing. First of all, I loved your insights. Your delivery was so smooth and very understandable, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
My question to you, when we were talking about the rise of kind of micro communities and this I guess comfort and niche connection, do you think that that's accidentally contributing to actually divide? Like, because to me, when I think about what consumers are searching for, I get a little bit nervous when I see people only veering to what fuels them and not having like an open mindset. So my question to you is, do you think that those go hand in hand, or do you think that consumers are able to separate them? Long question, but
That's fair. I would say it's a great question. As humans, we've always we have a foundation in tribes and like tribal living and being in small communities. And I think that's just it's a resurgence to the way that we're wired, and we're meant to live in those small communities. I think that in the online space, it can become fractured. And I think that there is real risk in people only seeking out information that they already believe in, because we know that the algorithms will then therefore serve that up. So I think that sort of thing creates divide, in that context of probably what you're talking about. I think return to more of the tight-knit communities, especially in-person ones or interest-based ones of people that have hobbies like you. I do think that creates that connection because we're wired to be in those tribes. So I think as a brand, it's that balance, right? Like, we're going to have to still reach people on those mass channels that has more efficiencies of scale, but we have to also know what are those niche communities and be brave enough to say that, like, I'm going to limit some of that mass budget or a good deal of that, and I'm going to allocate that and put that into really reaching people who have the hobbies, who have the interests, who I could really like put a drop in their bucket and change.
that makes sense. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we need the mic so online can hear.
Yeah, I usually don't have trouble being heard in a room. So I just wonder, you mentioned creating influencers and making them a part of your funnel. And I love that take. And I did specifically allocate budget for influencer partnerships. But with that reality, I wonder how you create an authentic relationship with an experience with an influencer as consumers become more aware of the fact that they are, if I'm being really negative, paid shills for the company.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's all in the selection of the right influencer, the right person, building a relationship with them, being in relationship with them, and making sure that they represent that culture that you're trying to build. The wrong decision, people will see right through that, and that will have a negative effect. So I think it's picking that and then engaging your customers, like asking them, what are the influencers that you enjoy? What are the ones that you follow? What are the things that you want to learn about? And again, creating that reprieve and being help to them instead of just using those influencers to like shout to them. And I think there's also an approach to the way that you design content, right? Which too, of what are you going to say? What are you going to have influencers be prompted to say, and having input into that and not making it so salesy and making it just more helpful.
So we have a few questions from the chat. I'll take this first one here from Megan. How do you balance responding to cultural pressure while staying anchored in long-term brand strategy?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that, like, there is not the or one or mass culture. If you're focused on your smallest viable audience of those people who really could benefit from what you offer them, then you're not at risk for detracting from the brand or just being at the expense of not meeting those who you are and those longer term objectives that you have. If you do try to go mass and create the whole culture, and for example, like if latch on to like the Coldplay moment, if that has nothing to do with who you are or what you stand for as a brand, then yeah, that detracts. But find those moments, again, chase those moments that are super authentic and relevant to who your customer inherently is.
We got another one on there and thanks for those participating online. We got from Sean, excellent presentation. I think that's how he said it. I'm pretty sure that's how he said it.
In that exact voice.
As consumer expectations evolve over time, what are some tactical and measurable ways brands can quantify emotional lift across different cohorts and historical periods?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question.
Yeah.
All about the data.
Well, anytime they say cohorts.
Yeah, cohorts.
You had me at cohorts.
Yeah, because one of my predictions was that idea of like, how do we make emotion a KPI? We've seen this at Red Door. I think, years ago, we were in like the heyday of data, KPI, and that was the world of like, we can measure things. We have the tagging, we have the tracking. And now I think over the past couple of years, which has been so fun and exciting, especially to inform creative, we're getting more back to like supplement that data and that information of attribution with also brand associations, surveying, and things like that. So I would say like the way to do this is talking to consumers. And I think everyone should have within their budget that allocation towards real research of whether it's focus groups, whether it's surveys, how are you going to connect and understand your audience? And some of these things might be, like guesses and feelings. I think this could be like a leading indicator of sales, right? But it's just this idea of like placing emphasis and even amongst like your leadership, articulating the importance of like, it's not just about those numbers. That's a short-term mindset. If we're looking at leads and conversion rates, we ought to really keep a pulse on those emotions and those feelings through surveying and talking to customers. And you can split those into cohorts.
Let's. There's another one online, but others in the room here also. Other questions here? All right. Oh, here we go.
You talked a lot about like niche communities, which I'm totally all in for. I think those are a huge way to inform like strategy and learn about your consumers and how you can actually help them. And you also mentioned, staying authentic, choosing the right influencers, but like how can brands mitigate the risk of joining those communities without making them feel like, oh my gosh, we have all these brands that are in our Reddit thread or our Facebook group wanting to learn about us, and just like keep it authentic without feeling like the walls are closing in on them.
Yeah. Like not inundating them and making sure that you still have that space. It's like knowing when and where those right forums are, right? And keeping an eye on the conversation that's happening in there, monitoring and looking, are there a lot of brands in there? And then if so, maybe, you send an influencer or an everyday person in there, someone at your company who also has, that hobby to just keep a pulse on it and monitor the types of conversations that are happening. So I think it's being selective and just monitoring too, because you could also be in one of those threads in a conversation and it's going well and you have, the right influence there, but it becomes overpowering and the conversation changes and new people come in. So keeping an eye on that too over time as it progresses.
Any other questions here in the room? I do think there were a couple more online. I just can't see them. This is another one from Megan. How do you help organizations justify return on energy internally when leadership is still ROI driven? And then she said, great minds question alike, Sean.
I think that goes back to what we were talking about with measurement. It's balancing it in your plan, thinking short and long term, and being able to articulate that those numbers, revenue, conversion rates, things like that are great. They're measurable, but they're more short term in mind. If we want to think about growth, if we want to think about going into new markets, challenging competitors, staying ahead, and also even just getting information to fuel like the best product that you can have, you ought to balance that with a sake of humanity, of understanding who the real person is. And so I think it's articulating the risk of that. If we don't listen to our customers, if we don't understand who people are, what they enjoy and what they think of us, then that's a risk to our brand reputation and our brand strength. And there's ways to measure that as well. But I think it's really hitting on that point. Like, there is risk to not continuing to monitor the brand and monitor what your customers think of you. Another competitor could just come in. The easiest way, I think, to do that with leadership is really the competitor narrative. All right. Thank you. We'll have networking after for those of you here, but really appreciate you joining me.